It's my great honor to introduce today's presenters, each of whom brings a world of experience, knowledge, and insight to the discussion. Moderating today's program is Dr. Margaret Chesney, Professor in Residence and Director of the UCSF Osher Center for Integrative Medicine. In addition to numerous awards and honors, Dr. Chesney oversees programs in integrative medicine research, education, and patient care, all of which emphasize the combined use of modern medicine with complementary approaches and established healing practices to promote health, wellness, and healing. Dr. Anand Dhruva is a board-certified internist, medical oncologist, and hematologist. He's a clinician and researcher specializing in medical oncology, integrative oncology, Ayurveda, and yoga, in addition to serving as a member of the research and clinical faculty at the UCSF Osher Center for Integrative Medicine. He is an associate professor of medicine on the hematology oncology faculty at UCSF's School of Medicine. Dr. Kamar Adamji is the Asian Art Museum's associate curator for South Asian art. Before coming to the museum, Kamar worked in the Islamic department at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and taught courses at New York area universities. She earned her doctorate in art history from New York University's Institute of Fine Arts in 2011. Sarah Corey received her PhD in neuroscience from the University of Vermont, where she studied the relationship between connective tissue, stretch, and pain. As a postdoctoral fellow at the UCSF Osher Center, Sarah is now conducting clinical research on yoga and massage for the treatment of chronic low back pain. She's been practicing yoga for over 10 years, is a certified yoga instructor, and recently conducted a yoga research study for back pain at the Osher Center, which grew into a publicly offered class series called Therapeutic Yoga for Low Back Pain. Rachel Lanzarati is a yoga teacher and practitioner with 15 years of experience who offers group therapeutic yoga classes at UCSF's Osher Center for Integrative Medicine. She's taught with research studies on restorative yoga for the metabolic syndrome, mindful breathing, integrative approaches to cancer survivorship, and yoga for low back pain. Rachel also leads community meditation groups grounded in the Vipassana tradition and sees clients at her San Francisco private practice, 5 Rivers Yoga. As you can see, this is quite an impressive roster of talent and experience. Thank you all for coming. Please help me welcome our esteemed presenters.
I'm Margaret Chesney. Sorry about this. It's so exciting to have standing room only, but I'm worried about people standing for that length of time. And so as we try to help the last people find seats, I'll go ahead and start. Today, as we did a few weeks ago, we will take a tour through the visual and scientific history of yoga from ancient to modern times. Yoga dates back over 4,000 years. It emerged in ancient India as a means to transcend suffering, which is a part of our human experience, unfortunately. And suffering often involves physical suffering, pain, and illness. Enlightened individuals in those ancient times realized that the potential for overcoming suffering often resides within ourselves. One of the ancient concepts of yoga was establishing balance and unity between mind and body. This is something we can all strive to achieve, and maybe through this afternoon, some of the breathing that we'll do and some of the information that you'll receive, you can achieve some improved balance of mind and body. At the heart of the story of yoga as a therapeutic modality is this deep and great respect for the idea of an integrated mind, body, and spirit. This is the key to the yoga as a healing art and to the therapeutic applications of yoga that have been used over the centuries. The yogic understanding of the body incorporates the concepts that we each have, and they're captured in this beautiful painting, which you'll hear about later, and that includes what's called the subtle energetic body. And that is the part of the body that has this self-healing capacity that underlies our physical anatomical bodies. This afternoon, we'll be reviewing modern scientific research on yoga studies that report the use of yoga for healing and for health. Our first study will actually be one that can apply to any one of us. It talks about using yoga to improve our mood and reduce anxiety and stress. Then we'll talk about low back pain, smoking cessation, the use of yoga to help handle the side effects of cancer chemotherapy, or the fatigue that often accompanies chronic illness. And finally, we'll discuss the use of yoga to help slow cognitive decline. For as some of us age, we experience cognitive decline, and there's evidence that yoga can be helpful there as well. As we do this, we will connect the studies with the art in the exhibit and to yoga concepts. With our help of Rachel and Sarah, we'll also demonstrate some of the actual yoga movements that were used in the studies that we describe. Kamar will get us started. Tell us more about the ancient vision of wholeness of yoga.
Thank you. Well, one of the opening verses of the Yoga Sutra defines yoga and explains a key concept, which is yoga is the cessation of thought. And once the spirit stands in isolation of the thoughts that plague us, we are able to correctly perceive reality and to see the world around us, both from within and externally. And this painting that shows the Hindu god Vishnu in his form as Vishvarupa, or the cosmic being. Sure. Represents the wonderful aspects of balance that are part of yoga practice. So just from the ways in which Vishnu is shown standing, he is perfectly still yet alert. There is a balance of the left and the right, the balance of the self and the cosmos. His two upper arms it's a perfectly symmetrical image, underlying the symmetries and balance that are within each one of us. His two upper arms are raised, his lower arms are pointing downwards. The right and the left each hold symbols of war, so there's the discus on the left and the mace below, which is counterpositioned by symbols of purity and positive energy, which are the conch shell and the lotus. I hope you can see it, but we also have a detail later on. His eyes have the moon as one pupil and the sun as the other. It's, again, balance of opposing forces, complementary forces, as well as the left and the right. Here again, through the image of a Jain seeker, or actually a Jinnah, who's the enlightened being, he's seated in a very poised, controlled, and perfectly balanced, harmonious pose, yet he is alert. You see that alertness through the gaze, through his active eyes, and the gently smiling face. So there is at once the stillness, which brings together harmony and balance.
Kamar, if I can now bring this back into health. In traditional medicine, so I practice a form of medicine called Ayurvedic medicine, the concept of balance is linked completely to the concept of health. So when we have balance in mind and body, we similarly have good health. And in fact, in these traditional systems like Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, much of the therapeutic approach is in an effort to retain balance. So I'll give you two examples. One is balance of mind. So when I start this lecture, maybe my mind is unsteady and I'm a little bit nervous, for example, and there's a lack of balance. Maybe my thoughts are racing, maybe I'm unable to gain that stability of mind. But then as I settle and get grounded and stable, the mind becomes also steady, stable, and balanced. And so you can see the contrast between imbalance and balance in the mind. And then similarly in the body, if you think about breathing, for example, when the breathing is not balanced, there may be difficulty with smooth passage of air into the body. There may be coughing. These are all states of imbalance. But when we're having a balanced respiratory system, the air moves smoothly in and out, and things function normally. And then you can also think about balance between systems. So if every system in my body is functioning properly, everything is in sync, everything is in harmony, everything is balanced, and I'm able to live and function in a healthy way. So this concept of balance, which you see in this image, again resonates as we think about some of the health implications of yoga and also Ayurveda, which we'll come back to later in this talk.
The concept of balance is something that was known to yogis, but it's also something that then began to be studied by science. How did yoga have its effects? That was a question that many people had, and their early scientific studies of yoga tried to translate these yogic concepts into a medical framework, and also then began exploring medical applications of yoga. And Kumar will now talk with us a bit about some of this early work that brought us to a science and then studying the application of yoga in medicine.
So we've been talking about balance, about turning inwards. This detail of another painting that's in the galleries really wonderfully shows that inward-looking balance, and he appears cross-eyed, but he is actually focusing all of his attention and energy right in here, up into the center of the forehead. But the place where we are today of yoga being so actively integrated into most people's everyday lives as a regimen of well-being, as a regimen of health and fitness, primarily through the practice of asana or postures. Historically, asana was just one of the many elements in a yogi's toolkit, and today it has become the leading element. But we see examples such as this, which comes from a medical textbook from India, early 1900s, where the subtle body or the internal energy that is made up of the chakras and other energy centers are starting to be mapped out vis-a-vis anatomy. And this, what I'll just talk about right now is a fairly short span of time, so less than 100 years, where we dramatically see the shift which brings us to where we are today. From about the mid-19th century, so about mid to late 1800s, yogis in India had started to be perceived as in somewhat of a negative way. They are part of now a colonial network. India becomes a colony of the British Empire in 1858. The British have been in India for much longer than that. And as a bigger part of social change, political change, yogis become the face of all that was once glorious about India but is now lost, and which needs to be resurrected, which needs to be lifted up. And from an image like this, and these were photographs produced by European and Indian photographers made for sale in their studios and carried well beyond India as souvenirs. You see how he looks slightly unpleasant. Yogis were feared for the supernatural powers that they were believed to have. The practices of early Hatha yoga involved were metaphysical along with spiritual, where the body was overcome in various ways. And the mind-body unity enabled metaphysical translation of the bodies in ways that became a yogi could levitate, a yogi could read other people's minds. Yogis were said to shapeshift. They could shift the balance of time and space continuum. But they also were barely clothed. They looked dirty, because they had dreadlocks and jatas. And so now we're talking 19th century Victorian period codes of appropriateness, and they did not fit into that scheme. So reacting to that type of perception of yogis, valid or invalid, that's not part of my concern right now. But responding to that type of perception, there were several different strands of development that were happening between the 1890s up until the 1940s. And a key figure in that emerges as Swami Vivekananda, who was a very influential guru who came to the United States very prominently in 1893 and gave a series of very inspiring talks at the World's Parliament of Religions in Chicago. And in the course of those lectures, he talks about a rational yoga, a scientific yoga, a philosophical yoga that is very markedly separating itself from the Hatha yogi that we just saw in the previous image, yet at the same time going back to the Yoga Sutras and other ancient Sanskrit texts to talk about a secularized yoga. He talks about yoga as being India's gift to humanity, but something that can be accepted and readily incorporated into a more global modern world. We then have, this is somewhat later, this is a text from the 1940s, but there were other yoga practitioners, Swami Kuvalayanda, for example, Sri Yogendra is another, who were medicalizing yoga, building yoga into a practice of health and fitness by incorporating elements of bodybuilding, of calisthenics, gymnastics, and other types of athletics in order to gain the image of a physical, strong body that was reflective of a strong internal presence. And we have a greater inclusion of moving exercises, of movement-based postures that would enable you to achieve that fitness and health regimen. And then parallel to that is the medicalized yoga, where like one of the first slides I started with, and here is another example, where esoteric concepts such as that of the Kundalini and other internal energy centers that were part of the subtle body definition are mapped onto the anatomy, and there are numerous scientific experiments and tests that are conducted in order to demonstrate the physiological benefits of yoga. And here are two examples from two separate, different issues of a journal called Yoga Mimamsa that were very influential and continued to use modern technology, modern scientific technology that was available to them in the 1920s to map out these correlations between internal and the external. And I think that brings us close to where you're going next.
Our modern research has actually continued to study the effects of yoga on the body. And in the former slide, you were seeing the use of technologies of the 1920s, and now we can bring the technology of 2010, 2014 to the study of yoga. And this study, which was published in 2010, uses a technique called magnetic resonance spectroscopy to explore the physiological effects of yoga. And Anand will tell us about the study that used this incredible measure of the brain.
So we're going to review a number of studies in the rest of this talk. And so I thought I would start with just giving you some background and some things to look for as you appraise these studies. One thing you'll see right away in this study in the title is that it's a randomized study. And randomization is commonly used in clinical studies in an effort to create balanced groups. So in this study, you're going to be comparing yoga to a control group. And you want those two groups to be balanced and equal so that you can make comparisons between the two. And you can imagine if randomization was not done that you might have unequal groups. So for example, if you had sicker people going into the yoga group, that group may then not do as well compared to the other group. And you might falsely conclude then that yoga doesn't work. But in contrast, if you balance the two groups, then you know that the final conclusions that you are making from that study are actually due to the intervention, not due to some extraneous factor. So that's one thing to keep aware of as you look at these studies. The second thing to pay attention to is what's called the control group, and that's the comparison group in these studies. And you have to compare the intervention to something, and you'll see two main comparison groups here. One is usual care, and that means basically the care that a person can get in the medical system as per usual. So it could mean medications, it could mean physical therapy, et cetera, the usual care that you can get. In contrast, another kind of control group that you can have, or a comparison group, is an active control group. And in this kind of a control group, the comparison group actually gets an intervention. So you'll see a study that we'll talk about later, and actually this one, where the comparison group is actually getting an intervention, in this case, walking. And so the reason you would do an active comparison group is many of the critics of complementary medicine and behavioral medicine say that the effect is just due to attention. So if I were to spend an hour with some of you, you may start to feel better just from that attention. And so having an active comparison group, it allows you to say that it wasn't due to attention, because even the comparison group got the same attention. So just a few things for you to pay attention to as we go through some of these studies. So let's look at this study here. So this is the study looking at yoga versus walking. And they included in this study healthy volunteers. And the purpose was to see whether yoga could affect mood, and corresponding to that, can it impact on the function of the brain? And this is a really kind of a remarkable or striking question to ask, because I think many of us would say, okay, yoga could improve mood, but how can it really change my brain? Do I really believe that it can change the functioning of my brain? And what they found in this study is that the participants who did the yoga, and they got a 12-week Iyengar yoga intervention, actually had improvements in mood over favoring or better than the comparison group, which is walking. And additionally, they found changes in the brain. So this is your brain on yoga right here. And just to orient you a little bit to this figure, you have the cortex of the brain, or the outer part of the brain, and then here you have the primitive brain, and the thalamus, which is the area of interest, is right in this region here, and this is a cross section. So again, you have here the cortex, the outer part of the brain, and then the thalamus, which is right here. And this is the region of the brain that they were very interested in. The thalamus functions in relaying impulses relating to movement, and it also functions in states of consciousness, so sleep and wake, for example. And they looked at whether the levels of this protein called GABA were influenced by yoga practice in this region of the thalamus right here. And what you see in this graph here is that before yoga, the GABA levels were as follows. And after a session of yoga, the GABA levels had increased in this region of the brain called the thalamus. So again, really kind of a remarkable finding that not only can yoga impact on mood, but it actually can affect the neurotransmitters in the brain. It can affect the functioning of the brain. And these changes were, again, associated with each other. So as GABA increases, the mood improves. And the function of GABA is really to have a calming effect on the mind and the brain. So physiologically, it sort of all fits together, how yoga can have this impact.
What's really striking about that, too, is the time period of the class pre to post to get your GABA levels up was only 60 minutes. So, if we were doing a yoga class here, you'd have a considerable time to improve your GABA levels. What this study demonstrates, though, is that anyone, in this case these were healthy volunteers, can improve their mood, and you can see it physiologically using these new measurement techniques in changes in the brain. Next, what we'll do is discuss the use of yoga to treat medical patients. So now we've looked at healthy volunteers, and then I think some of you are interested in saying, well, does it really make a difference for people who are dealing with medical conditions or with other things that may affect their body's health? Kamar, can you tell us about the beginnings of the practice of using yoga for medical concerns?
Well, to my knowledge, thank you. To my knowledge, most yoga texts and treatises do not specifically address a medical application. That comes in Ayurvedic texts, which are the medical texts. But a byproduct of yoga practice, yoga philosophy, is improved well-being all the way through. And a quote from one of the Upanishads is rather striking in that, because it says, "He who possesses the fire of yoga, unto him does not come death, disease, or old age." And right there, by implication, there is embedded in yoga practice a way in which to take care not only of the mind and the spirit, but also of the body.
You know, what stands out to me in that quote is the idea that he who possesses the fire of yoga has good health. And again, to correlate it with Ayurvedic medicine, one of the important concepts in Ayurveda is the concept of fire, or Agni, or metabolism. And Ayurveda speaks of the idea that if you can maintain good metabolism, good digestion, good fire, that you have also good health. So there's a nice parallel there, again, even to a medical application of that concept of fire.
Well, the choice of words in many of these texts are not just poetic and metaphorical, but they have many layers of meaning. And in this case, you make those relationships quite easily.
Yeah.
And Kamar, can you point out on this piece, this painting, where the fire is?
Sure.
Just for people, it's a little complicated.
Sure. One of the things that you might notice when you walk through the exhibition downstairs, when you see paintings of yogis, invariably they are practicing in front of a fire. And in this painting, we see it here. Oops. There's another one, the upside down yogi. The upside down yogi is also practicing over fire. And it was something interesting that came out of our conversation in the last round. To me, from the art historical point of view, thank you. The presence of fire was to increase spiritual heat, or tapas. But Anand pointed out that it was also a wonderful basic element of healing treatment, of sweat therapy. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll let you go on in that one.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So in Ayurvedic medicine, they do Svedana, which we talked about in our last talk, which is, again, using sweat or heat to sort of purge or cleanse the body. So again, that's a very similar idea there also. Yeah.
So now we're going to turn to actually looking at some modern applications of yoga for medical problems. I'm going to now ask for a show of hands. How many of you know someone or personally experience or have experienced in the past any back pain? If you would raise your hand. Okay, it's pretty universal. It doesn't surprise. Okay, well, that's actually one of the major health problems in the United States. Back pain accounts for 20 to 25% of medical claims, and it costs us, and this is probably a low figure, of $34 billion just in medical costs. That doesn't take it, and that's per year. It doesn't take into account workman's compensation or time lost from work or the impact on quality of life. So given those costs, it's not surprising that people are beginning to say, gee, I wonder if there's something else I can do rather than having back surgery or having a spinal fusion, which for many people doesn't tend to actually alleviate the pain. So recently, there have been a number of studies for the looking at the application of yoga for back pain, and actually an investigator at the Osher Center who's very interested in this is actually Sarah Corey, who's sitting right next to me. So we're going to now hear, Anand will tell us about some of this research that shows how yoga is promising.
So this study was done in the UK, and scientists here will say, okay, we have to repeat it in the United States because it was done in the UK. But I actually think we can actually believe these results. It's what is called a pragmatic study. So it's a study that compared yoga to usual care, which is what I mentioned to you earlier. And this is becoming a new trend in research these days, is to do pragmatic designs, which are designs that can then be implemented in real-world practice. So in those kinds of designs, you're going to use a control group that is what you would get in regular medical care. So in this case, usual care. And because this was done in the UK health system, they were able to do a really large and really well-done study, actually. This study randomized 300 patients into either yoga or usual care. And the intervention for the study was a 12-week yoga intervention that included, again, postures, breathing practices, and relaxation techniques. And the main findings from this study you'll see in this figure. And what you see here, let me orient you to the figure first. You have, we've lost power in this one as well. The hashed line here, which is the usual care group, and the dark line is the yoga group. You have here time. The study was conducted over 3 months, but then they followed the patients at 6 months and 12 months. And here you have the main outcome on the y-axis, which is called the Rowland-Morris Disability Questionnaire. And that questionnaire asked about people's pain, back pain, but additionally it asked about their functioning. So one of the questions on the questionnaire, for example, is, does your back pain interfere with your ability to get dressed in the morning? So again, it was a very practical type of a questionnaire. And the main thing that you see here is that with yoga practice, you get reductions in disability due to back pain, whereas the usual care group kind of just stays about the same. And what's interesting is that even after the intervention ended at 3 months, those changes are sustained even at 1 year from completing or from enrolling in the study. So you get a nice separation between the two different groups, which is statistically significant, and sort of demonstrates the effects of yoga on functioning. One of the other findings from the study is that the people in the yoga group had higher sense of pain self-efficacy. And what that means is that yoga gave them something to do when they were in pain that actually helped improve their pain. So essentially it was very empowering. It gave them tools to use to help their own health. And I think that's another sort of remarkable finding from this study. As a result of this study and several other studies like this, some of which were conducted here in the US by a researcher named Karen Sherman, many experts now say that yoga should be considered on par with other options for back pain. So if a person is debating between pain medications, maybe they should consider yoga as a first option and then consider other options, which is, again, kind of a remarkable finding. The last important thing from this study is that these same researchers did a cost-effectiveness analysis. And that showed that not only was yoga helpful, as you see in this slide, but it actually also saved money. And I think that's all.
I'd like to invite everybody to approach the practices with a beginner's mind. As if you were meeting them for the first time, as if you were meeting your body and your breath for the first time. The other thing in a group this size to have this work is if you're willing to give this 100% of your attention. And I'd like you to sit forward in your chair and bring your feet to the floor. And if we were in a class today together, which perhaps we are just for a few minutes here, I would also ask you to really pay attention to yourself and to stay within a pain-free range of movement. Okay? Can you agree to do that? All right. So let's begin by just moving the breath a little bit. So let's inhale through the nose, lifting the shoulders to the ears, and exhale, release the shoulders, breathing out through the mouth. Again, inhale and exhale. This time with a sound or a sigh on the out breath. Inhaling through the nose. And again. One more time. Bring your hands to your body, one hand below the belly button, one hand above the belly button. One hand below, one hand above. Close your eyes if you're comfortable closing your eyes. Let the eyes rest. How do you know you're breathing? How do you know you're breathing? Notice the movement of the body with the breath. Let the hands tell you something about how you're breathing. You might notice the rise and fall of the belly beneath the lower hand, the mid-belly, beneath the upper hand. You might feel the chest moving, and the breath at the nose. Now, over the next couple of breaths, I'd like you to give the breath a little direction, so that as you exhale, draw the belly in gently. Let the inhale be free. As you breathe out, zipping up the low belly to press the breath gently up and out. With a sense of curiosity, breathing out, breathing in. Now we'll bring some movement of the spine in with this movement of the breath. And if you get confused, you can open your eyes. Sarah's demonstrating in the chair and I'm standing. As you exhale and draw the belly in, allow the back to round toward the back of your chair, releasing the shoulders and the head. As you inhale, let the chest swim forward, reach the tailbone back behind you and arch. Exhale, drawing the belly in, allow yourself to round forward and down. Inhale to lift. Chest opens, tailbone reaches back behind you. Continue on your own. Exhale to round. Follow the pace of your own breath. Inhale to arch. Breathing out. Breathing in. Take your time. Moving the spine with the breath. 2 more at the pace of your breath. And then find your way back to neutral, upright, present. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Sarah.
I just wanted to make one comment about that. It was really a great demonstration. Thank you both for that. If you can sort of, thinking about this demonstration and having done it, can you sort of see how that would be helpful for back pain? One of the things that does by linking your breath to the movement is that you don't overextend yourself, right? You're always staying within your capacity. And a lot of back injuries, back pain is worsened by when we overdo it, when we go beyond our capacity. And so in this exercise, by linking the breath to the movement, you become fully aware of the movement that you're doing with your spine. And so you're controlled, you're contained, and again, you're balanced with it. So I think that's really the key element there.
Thanks so much, Anand, and thank you again. That was great. This is a taste of what people do at the Osher Center, and these are exercises that are part of the new program that we have on yoga for low back pain. This was what you just experienced was the really linking things, bringing the breath, the mind, the body together, all in balance, as Anand just said. And earlier we talked about our lives and how the stress in our lives dislinks those, so that there's this chatter going on in our minds. So now I hate to do this because we all feel so imbalanced, but we're going to talk a little bit about stress. Stress really affects our bodies and our minds. And in fact, chronic stress has been found to have a really adverse impact on health. And it affects different people different ways often related to their constitution or aspects of their lives. It's associated, as we just heard, with low back pain. Low back pain can be actually triggered just by stress, or it can also be when people are under stress, they are not thinking about doing things in that linked way that Anand just said. They overpush themselves, they're tired, and they can actually then add a physical cause to their back pain on top of just living with a great deal of stress. So we've heard about stress, and it affects musculoskeletal conditions. It can affect your immune system. Another way that stress is so important is that we find that many people, particularly in our country and probably in the UK, do different things to help us manage our stress that are also unhealthy. We drink coffee to get up because we haven't had enough sleep. And we use caffeinated beverages throughout the day in order to stay awake. So we're basically using our body, instead of being in harmony with our bodies, we are basically using our bodies as an instrument and using various, if you will, drugs to actually make the body work. We're not following our body, we're actually pumping things into our body. So we find that people then, after doing the caffeinated beverages all day long, what do when they return home? We have a glass of wine, and that's to wind down. So we're basically not really staying in tune with our bodies. It's become a machine that we're using. Other people, 25% of Americans still smoke, and we find that using tobacco is one way that people try to manage stress. And one reason when people are trying to quit smoking and they go back to cigarette smoking is because something occurs in their life. A divorce, some other thing happened, they might be losing their job, or they're trying to get that term paper done, so they go back to smoking because they're using that to help them handle stress. So the lesson here is look at the ways that we turn to if we're not thinking about our bodies and we're not thinking about yoga, we try to manage stress in unhealthy ways. So actually, yoga has been studied for its potential to help people actually deal with stress and with addiction. And Anand will now describe one of these studies that helped smoking cessation with the use of yoga.
So as you can see from the title, this is a study looking at yoga as a complementary treatment. And that already tells you a lot, that this study design is going to build on what's already done for smoking cessation by adding yoga to that picture. And you also see the study population. This is women, and this study included 55 women who were smokers. And the study design is a little bit complicated, so let me describe it to you a little bit. They had two groups. The first group included cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one of the treatments that's used for smoking cessation, plus yoga. So they added those two things together. The comparison group was cognitive behavioral therapy with what they call a group-based wellness program. And that's what I talked to you earlier about, an active control group. So in the group-based wellness program, they saw videos on health education, and then they met with a counselor that was matched in time to the time of the yoga sessions. So again, it was the attention that I was talking to you about earlier. So again, just to reiterate, cognitive behavioral therapy plus yoga compared to cognitive behavioral therapy plus an active control group. Right? And the main outcomes from this study were abstinence rates, so quit rates from smoking, which they measured in a very interesting way. They did salivary cotinine levels. So cotinine is a metabolite of nicotine, and it can be measured in the saliva, and it's an objective measure. So it doesn't rely on somebody just saying that, yes, I quit, when in fact maybe they didn't quit. And in addition, they also measured people's mood and stress and other things that go with what Margaret was talking to you about earlier. So these are the main findings from this study. And let me walk you through this a little bit because there's a lot of information here. Let's first start with the top panel here. If you can see my green light here, you see this is smoking outcomes by treatment group. So you have the yoga group here in this column. You have the wellness or the comparison group here. And you have outcomes at 8 weeks. Again, this was an 8-week vinyasa yoga intervention, so they measured the outcomes at the end of 8 weeks. And then they also followed patients at 3 months and 6 months out. And what you see here are the abstinence rates using a 7-day quit, which is the salivary cotinine levels. So you have 40.6% quit rate here in the yoga group versus 13% here in the group-based wellness group. So again, a difference between the two groups. And the odds ratio tells you that you have about almost a 5 times greater chance of quitting if you got yoga compared to the usual care, or I'm sorry, the group-based wellness group. So again, 5 times greater chance of quitting with yoga compared to the group-based wellness. And as you can see, a lot of these trends still continued at 3 months and 6 months, that there's still a difference. 22% versus 9% and 19% versus 13%. Here on the bottom is the change in mood as you go through the yoga intervention compared to the wellness group. So this is week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8 of the yoga intervention or the wellness. And this shows you that the yoga group had a steady rise in positive mood that was more than you got with the wellness, which is the darker bars here. And you also had improvements in negative mood, so less negative mood with yoga, here, compared to the dark bars, which are the wellness group. So the way these two things fit together, one of the main things that causes people to smoke maybe in the first place is not feeling well, maybe psychologically. And one of the things that also causes them to relapse and to return to smoking are these same sorts of feelings. And so here you have an intervention in yoga that helped people to quit, but then also improved their mood, improved how they felt, thereby perhaps preventing them from relapsing and going back to smoking. Again, I think that's a really remarkable kind of result when you tie those two things together. The other interesting thing that these researchers did is the type of yoga that they did in this study, which was vinyasa yoga, which many of you may know is a flowing and active style of yoga. And so one of the thoughts was that when people quit smoking, many people complain that they gain weight. And so choosing a yoga intervention that's active, that's strenuous physically, might be a nice choice there because it might help people to maintain weight or maybe lose weight as well. So again, you have in here yoga kind of meeting the person where they are and trying to address multiple aspects of a problem, not just the need to smoke cigarettes, but sort of the psychosocial context of smoking as well. And I think that's what makes interventions like this really remarkable.
Anand, just one thought about this too, and what you're seeing in this is the biggest effect was in that first 8 weeks. And this is something that we all have struggled with. You know, we'll do something, that New Year's resolution when you decide you're going to do something better in this next year, and we were able to do that for a short period of time. And then actually what we know is that the stresses and strains of our everyday life tend to begin to kind of confront us, and over time people fall back. And so you see in this, it's a little sad that the yoga group was doing so much better when they had just finished the 8 weeks. And it begs for that next study that would figure out what is a really optimal way, maybe with texting using iPhones or something, staying in touch with people, encouraging them to stay at it, to keep that ratio of quitting a lot higher. And that's the type of research that we do at the Osher Center. How to build on strengths that people have and then get those changes to last over time. Now,
yeah, we do. So just to take you back into context here, so we talked about a lot of the science here. Let's take you back to the context of vinyasa yoga, so which was the intervention in the smoking cessation study. And here you have BKS Iyengar, who was one of the students of Krishnamacharya, who was one of the originators of modern yoga. And they were really the originators of this style of vinyasa yoga, or flowing yoga. So let's just take a moment to watch this. It's hypnotic. I think I could keep watching that for a long time.
And that was Iyengar, right?
It was.
Yeah. And that was Iyengar, right?
It was,
Yeah.
yes.
And now we'll have Rachel demonstrate that. Just kidding, just kidding, just kidding, just kidding. The focus of our next study is on yoga breathing techniques. And what I'd like to do now is examine the place of breathing practices in the history of yoga using images from the exhibition. And Kamar will guide us through this.
So, most of the yoga paintings do not show breathing. There are a few examples that here and there that crop up of a practitioner in the process of alternate nostril breathing or in a series of other pranayama practices. But in nearly every discussion, every description, and in practice, breathing takes a core and central role. It is the life force. It is the ultimate energy conduit in our body. And back again to this painting of Vishnu, if you take a look at his nostrils, there are little people coming out of it. I mean, this is the ultimate visualization of that life force of the breath.
And you know, in our last talk, we talked about the power of breath, and I mentioned that we take in our lifetime 670 million breaths on average if you live to the age of 80. And again, sort of speaking to the power of breath and how it can have such a major impact on our day-to-day lives.
And when you think about it being the life force, it truly is. That's how we mark birth, is with that first breath, and we mark the end of our lives with our last breath. Well, let's now look at some research on the effects of yoga and breathing. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, excuse me. Demonstration. Actually, we're going to now have a demonstration of breathing, and we've already been doing some breathing, but now we're going to take that to a higher level with some additional breathing training from Rachel and Sarah.
So as someone once said, if you can breathe, you can do yoga. As you can see in this image, he's using his fingers, or a mudra, hand position, hand posture, to close one nostril and then the other. So Nadi Shodhana, alternate nostril breathing. We'll be doing a version of this, but without the hands today. And to play first a little bit with left and right. So could we go back to the image actually of Vishnu? Yeah. For inspiration. So if you are able, please stand. And if it's more appropriate for you to remain seated, please stay seated. And Sarah is seated as well. So let's inhale together and raise the arms to shoulder height. You might need to negotiate with your neighbors. Exhale here. Inhale, lift the arms overhead. Let the shoulders relax. Exhale, release. Inhale halfway. Exhale here. Inhale, lift. Reach through the fingertips. Shoulders soft. Exhale all the way down. Okay, now listen carefully. The left arm will continue and the right arm will stay. Inhale, left all the way up. Exhale, catch that right arm as you come down. Inhale, left arm stays, right arm lifts. And exhale all the way down. Good, we'll do the same thing. Inhale, left arm continues. And release. Inhale, right arm continues. And release. One more time each side. Bringing the breath all along the length of the arm as it lifts and lowers. And now both arms together. Reach and release. Again. And if it's appropriate, if you feel stable, coming up onto the balls of the feet this time. Little more energy, and down. One more, all together. And release. Good. And take your seat. So perhaps with the inspiration here of the little people coming out of the nose, I'd like you again to sit forward in your chair attentively the way that we did earlier. Let the eyes close if you're comfortable closing the eyes, or rest the eyes toward the floor. And bring attention to the feeling of the breath at the nose. The breath moving in and out of the nostrils. Breathing in and out at the nose. Now begin to direct the breath so that it's predominantly flowing through the left side of the nose, the left nostril, as if you're breathing mostly through the left side of the nose. In and out through the left nostril. And now let that go. Come back to center, breathing in and out through both nostrils. Now shift to the right nostril. Direct the breath predominantly through the right side of the nose. And let that go. Come back to center. Both nostrils together. Now, moving the breath from left to right. Inhale left. Exhale right. Inhale right. Exhale left. In left. Out right. In right. Out left. One cycle on your own. Thank you. As you heard earlier, this practice is said to bring together the left and right sides of the body, the left and right sides of the brain, creating wholeness.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Sarah. And remember the Vishnu, the beautiful image before with the left and right arms and how balanced they are. And now you may even, some of you are experiencing a greater sense of balance now. So let's look at some research on the effects of yogic breathing practices in a medical condition.
So this is a study that we did at the Osher Center a few years back. And in this study, our research question was, can you just experienced be helpful for patients undergoing chemotherapy? And so in this study, we randomized patients to either yoga breathing practices, and we taught patients 5 breathing practices, breath observation, alternate nostril breathing, rapid diaphragmatic breathing, and a slow extended exhalation. And the comparison group got usual care, but then they crossed over and got the breathing practices later on in the study. And these were patients, again, getting chemotherapy for cancer. And these were some of our results. So this is looking at sleep and measuring sleep disturbance, which you see on the y-axis. This is time. The study was done over 2 cycles of chemotherapy. So a cycle of chemotherapy typically lasts about 2 or 3 weeks. And so you see here the blue is the yoga, the red is the usual care, and the usual care got yoga during the second half of the study. So in the first part of the study, you see a clear improvement in the yoga group here. The usual care group actually got slightly worse in their sleep disturbance, but then when they started to get yoga, which is at this point, their sleep disturbance improved. And again, this is a small study, it's a pilot study, But again, it shows you that the breathing practices can actually be utilized for a medical purpose, in this case sleep, that it actually improved their sleep while undergoing chemotherapy. And sleep tends to be a pretty significant problem for patients undergoing chemotherapy.
So this study that we've just heard about was looking at the role of breathing and yoga for chemotherapy, and now Anand's going to talk about another study using yoga for an effect that some breast cancer patients have in terms of fatigue.
Yeah, so fatigue is an equally difficult problem for cancer patients. Some would say that maybe 90 to 100% even of cancer patients experience fatigue, and many have fatigue even after they finish their cancer treatment. So the research question they asked in this study is, can yoga be used to reduce fatigue and reduce inflammation, which is kind of the other interesting part of the question, among breast cancer patients after they've finished their treatment? Inflammation, chronic inflammation, has been linked to a number of diseases, heart disease certainly, possibly cancer. And then additionally, chronic inflammation is linked to symptoms like fatigue. And even in a syndrome called chronic fatigue syndrome, there's research that suggests that those patients have chronic inflammation as well. And so what they did in this study, again, it's a randomized control trial, as you see in the title. They randomized patients, 200 patients with cancer, to either yoga or a usual care control group. And the yoga that they received in this study was hatha yoga, so kind of a typical kind of yoga that you can get in the community. And these are some of their results. Again, these are very complicated figures, but let me walk you through it a little bit here. What you have on the x-axis, the bottom here, is time, baseline, post-treatment, and 3 months post-treatment. Again, this was a 12-week intervention. And on the y-axis, you have the different outcomes. Here you have fatigue, here you have vitality, here you have depressive symptoms, and on the bottom, you have different inflammatory molecules. IL-6 is one, IL-1 beta is the other, and TNF-alpha is the third one. So these are all proteins that are made in the body when there's inflammation. And what you see in the study is that the yellow, which is the yoga group, has improvements in fatigue, vitality, and depression, and correspondingly has reductions in these pro-inflammatory proteins in the body. So again, a finding that shows you that, again, mood is improved, fatigue is improved, and associated with that is a reduction in inflammation in the body. And this I think you'll find interesting as well. So this looked at just the yoga participants, and it classified them based on how much they practiced. So it gave them 3 different groupings: high practice, moderate practice, or no practice. And the interesting thing you see here is that the more you practice, the better the outcomes are. So on the top, your fatigue, when you do no practice, remains pretty high. But if you do high practice, it reduces significantly here. Similarly with vitality, similarly with depressive symptoms, both of those improve the more that you practice. And interestingly, the same trends follow for these inflammatory proteins. So when you do a lot of practice, you have much less IL-6 circulating around in your body and much less inflammation. And so for any of you who have trouble maintaining your yoga practice, I thought this would be a great motivation that the more you practice, the better that you will do as well.
And it's inflammation. There's so much attention to this now. Any of you have issues with arthritis, that's also an inflammatory condition. Allergies, those kinds of things, inflammatory conditions. So it's what you can see why people at the Osher Center, our investigators, get really excited about this, because then we say, let's do it. Let's look at what we can find with people who have arthritis. What about people with heart disease, inflammation in the coronary vessels, which is linked to increased risk of early death from heart disease, which is our #1 killer. So there's lots of opportunities. This is a very exciting area of research. The yoga as a way of life, we've now seen, is a way to bring attention to that issue of balance and caring for the body, and in particular the mind. And we've looked at studies that span a wide spectrum, from healthy volunteers, we want to get our GABA up and we want to get our inflammation down, to cancer patients, like the women in that latest study that are survivors of breast cancer. What I'd like to do now is talk with you just briefly about a pilot study we did at the Osher Center, that it was among older adults with moderate dementia or moderate cognitive decline. This is a study that was called Preventing Loss of Independence through Exercise, or PLIE was the term we used for this. And this was a collaboration between people at the UCSF Osher Center and the Aging Center. And in this study, again, we had 2 groups. Our goal, and I should mention this, that to date, despite all the efforts, there really are no medications that are very effective in preventing cognitive decline or slowing it down. We're not doing very well in that area. There's a tremendous amount of attention. People feel very hopeful, but right now we have very little to offer. The literature had suggested, when they do these large consensus conferences, that they're looking for what's the evidence for drugs, and then but it turns out that the only thing that shows some evidence for slowing cognitive decline, in addition to using your brain, which is important, is exercise. Exercise is still there, but then many people in the biomedical community go, oh yeah, but that's not so good, let's get a drug. Well, some of us were saying, well, since we don't have a medication yet, why don't we take a look at exercise a little bit more closely? So what we came up with on the next slide was, we don't have that, okay, let's go back one. I thought we had another slide in there, so I'll describe it. What we did there was we actually created something that we called integrative exercise, because we know that people that are showing cognitive decline will benefit from conventional exercise. That is muscle strengthening. As people get older, it's really important that they keep active and keep their muscles toned. So we wanted to basically have some exercises to bring in some strengthening so that people can actually get up out of their chair. And we also looked closely and studied Pilates and Feldenkrais maneuvers too, so we could train people in optimal ways to do things like that. But at the same time, observing the kind of research findings that we have with yoga, we wanted really to bring in yoga for these people who are showing moderate decline. Very interested in the breathing, because we need to get breathing. If you know people as they are older and they have cognitive decline, they start to be in wheelchairs, they tend to slump, and they're not getting enough oxygen. So we wanted to bring in the breathing and the stretching, just doing the exercises that you just did with raising the arms. These are things that people with moderate decline can really do. So we came up with what we called integrative exercise, where we wove the yoga in with some other exercises. We also did this in a circle. It's interesting in places where people with cognitive decline go through the days, which is where we did this work. We were doing it at a day center where a lot of seniors are. They teach a class, but they do it this way, where they have an instructor and everyone's in a line. What we did in this class was put everyone in a circle so they could see one another and connect. And we even had exercises where they would reach and touch the other, and we found that people will try harder if they have a goal than just raising your arm or press going out. But if I have to reach all the way to Kamar, I'm going to lean a little further. So that was what we included in plie. So it was integrative exercise. At the core was yoga. And now I'd like to share the results. This is very much like the slides that Anand showed earlier. You have, for one of the things we were trying to do is slow cognitive decline. So we measured cognitive function. On the far, you have plie on one side, and what we called usual care. These people were also having exercise. This was 18 weeks of exercise in both groups, but they were doing the standard exercise they did. So it was an active control with standard exercise at the center, with plie, with the yoga edition on the left. So what you have is in the baseline is the pre, and then the post is the middle column. I'm thanking Anand, who's helping with the pointing here. And you saw, and this was stunning, we didn't slow cognitive decline. Our cognitive function, we improved cognitive function. This was a surprise. We didn't expect this. We were stunned. Now, if you look at the other group, they started about the same level. Their exercise after 18 weeks, they had slipped, and then we followed people over time another 18 weeks into the future. So we have, going back to the plie side, an increase from pre to post 18 weeks, and it holds. It's holding. So they are showing an increase in cognitive function compared to the controls who also had exercise. We also looked at caregiver burden. We were trying to see, well, does this make a difference at home? So we interviewed the caregivers to see if the caregiver burden went down. If people are functioning better, then the caregivers would be saying, you know, my burden is less. And here you see plie compared to the usual care. The plie group started out with caregiver burden, and then it dropped at the end of the 18 weeks, and that has continued. On the comparison group, there was no effect on caregiver burden. And we're following this up now with wanting to actually train the caregivers to do the same exercises in the home to see if we can get more effects. This was presented, it hasn't been, we've submitted an article, it hasn't been published yet, but I wanted to share it with you. When this was presented at the neurology meetings, my colleague, Deborah Barnes, and this is really her study, she got up, but she didn't tell them it was exercise. She was on a panel, and there had just been 2 other presenters. You can imagine, if this is, you know, the first presenter said, we did this big drug study, it didn't work. The next speaker got up and said, we did this drug study, and it didn't work. So Deborah decided to present her study a little differently. She just said, imagine if we had a treatment on the shelf, and she said, and we brought that in, and then she described the whole study, but she never said what the treatment was until the end. And then she described integrative exercise, and people were just stunned because the effects that we showed with improved cognitive function are better than any of the drug studies that have been seen to date. So I just wanted to kind of close with that because it's such a hopeful sign that there may be things that we can do, and it underscores that point that we have within us, in our subtle bodies, the capacity to heal ourselves. So we're just, oh, they had the exercise. Oh, they weren't quite in the right order. I apologize for that. But you've got all the results there. So now we just wanted to conclude, and then we have a little bit of time for questions. But in this talk and the one, if some of you were here before, we've toured the visual and scientific history of yoga from 4,000 years ago to really this last study is 2014. The ancient concepts of yoga, including establishing balance and this unity of mind and body, which some of you may have even just experienced today with the help of Rachel and Sarah, these concepts remain relevant to the therapeutic efforts that we have in bringing yoga to medicine today. Yoga has been studied for its potential benefits in healthy people trying to overcome addiction and those suffering from back pain, as well as those who are living beyond cancer. And yoga can be integrated in other aspects of care. You can weave your yoga in with a healthier diet, with group support like we had in the plie study, and you can create a holistic treatment to enhance your health and well-being. And I can say, for those of us who are doing this research, we expect, with this increasing interest in and the scientific advances of yoga, that its role will continue to grow in medical science this year and for years to come. Thank you so much.